1917, during the February Revolution in Russia, a lot would change in Eastern Europe as the power vacuum left by the collapse of both the previous Russian government and the German Empire a year later led to independence movements across the region. And one of the new nations established was ours, the Republic of Belarus. Our independence wasn't secured, however, and the newly created Soviet Union under Vladimir Lenin would attempt to reclaim their lost territories in the west. But by forming an alliance with our neighbors, we were able to repel their attacks, even if it came at the cost of giving away some of our lands to the Ukrainians. The next 10 years, with our sovereignty secured, we turned inwards to try and solve our internal issues, ranging from a lack of identity to agrarianism and illiteracy. But despite these issues, our president, the general which helped us gain our independence, has been able to stay in power. Though he only controls the army, as after the victory of the BNSP in the elections, they have formed up a government. And the DNSP are one of the most radical parties in our country, as they take inspiration from the German Valkism movement, a far-right ideology centering around militarism and national pride. But surprisingly, the diarchy with the general and the party has been stable, though not for long, as while exiting the Belarusian National Congress, our president was shot and killed. And with him, the stability of our nation died. Because with our army and government having different views on where our country should head, without a unifying factor, a power struggle would now begin between the two. But it was the government which took the initiative and set out to enact sweeping reforms to forge the state into one similar to the German. We started by mobilizing a people's militia to rival the army and raise our influence. And to arm them, the Germans happily assisted us, as we will serve as a valuable ally once the new state has been established. To further shift the balance of power, public speeches were held, peasant support was gathered, and we consolidated state assets away from the army. But the army didn't stay quiet, and they soon launched their own campaigns, calling our policies weak and even arresting one of our party members. As a response, we passed more populist policies, and strangely enough, some accidents occurred where some opposition just disappeared. No idea why though. To then deal the final blow to the army, we studied their tactics and found out that their remaining power came from the military budget. So we slashed it, leading to their influence waning past the point of relevance. And so our BNSP stands as the undisputed ruler of Belarus, and we can begin driving through our reforms to create a new and proud nation. Starting with the industrialization of our country, as with our current agrarian economy, our future ambitions will never come to fruition. But just as we started, terrifying news showed up in our newspapers. Due to great colonial unrest in the British Empire, the stock market of London had collapsed, causing economic crashes across the world. And this economic downturn eventually reached us as well, provoking layoffs and lower efficiency in general. Which means we must completely redraw our economic plans to account for this collapse and ensure that it never occurs again. Once it was drawn up, we immediately went to work nationalizing key industries who were weakened by the crash and started subsidizing the massive agricultural sector of our nation. These subsidies included infrastructure construction as well as modernization. And we also took the opportunity to start land reforms to begin reducing our reliance on agriculture. All this increased food exports, which continued recovering our economy and granted us much needed state income. This income was then quickly reinvested into our economy, for example with the construction of hydroelectric dams and 2 hardware and machine plants, which both industrialized our nation to a point that we couldn't be considered an agrarian nation anymore and healed the economy so that the stock market crash was concluded over. While our country still isn't the economic powerhouse it very well could be, we've decided to turn away from economic work for a short while. Instead, we will start working on the Valkist reforms that will transform our nation. To ensure that they get correctly implemented, we started working closer with the Germans. Getting inspired by their nationalism, we could bolster ours, which we found was easiest to achieve through the fear of our Russian socialist neighbors, since they will return, and if we don't unite as Belarusians, Russians, we will be subjugated under the Leninist ideology. Another reform was that we desecularized education, allowing the church to once again help solve the literacy issue. Then the final of the reforms, before turning back to our economic initiatives, was that we turned our parliamentarian system to a presidential one to ensure that the socialist takeover cannot occur from the inside. Finally, back to economics, we improved electrification through several efforts, which then allowed us to expand our railway system. We could then open the Minsk Arms Factory, a massive complex increasing our military production with 50%. And this came exactly at the right time, because just a few days before, the Germans had declared war on the Rhineland military mandate, which meant war with the whole continental Entente. While it started alright, the Germans soon showed some weakness by losing Breslau to the Czechs, which was quite scary since we are supposed to ally them. And the bigger issue is that we can't even help them, since we have no way to send them forces even if we join their alliance. But suppressing these worrying thoughts, we continued under the pretext that war had arrived on the continent and that it's time to mobilize. We had already equipped our infantry with artillery and shovels, as well as solidified the party's control over it. But with manpower running out only after 140,000 soldiers on the field, we need to expand conscription. To achieve this, we first had to transform our general staff. Then we updated our doctrines with the focus on trench warfare to defend our nation, which was finally enough to justify increased conscription. Now, even though we still can't reach the Germans, we still decided that it was time to join the faction, as long as they recognize our territorial ambitions. Territorial ambitions of restoring the defunct Grand Duchy of Lithuania, as well as claim its identity, removing our own issues of identity. And the Germans gladly recognized these claims, in exchange for us joining the Stahl Pact and their war. But now the issue returns: how are we supposed to reach the Germans and help them? Well, with our claims in mind, the only option would be to demand Lithuania from the Polish state. Since our army still is small though, we have to rapidly prepare. This was done by urgently opening up minor arms plants and reorganizing our army to quickly deploy 6 new infantry divisions. So with 20 divisions, enough to hold off the Polish and Lithuanian armies, we sent the demand of annexation to the Polish. And to our massive surprise, they complied, allowing our army to annex all of Lithuania and finally grant us entry into the German war. We immediately sent our army to finish off the Czech resistance, while at home switching our industry towards war through further mobilization and creation of steel plants for our military industry. As soon as our forces arrived outside of Brno, we started assaulting the city. Its defenses eventually fell together, and with it, the first nation in the continental Entente capitulated. After this, we could continue into the non-aligned Hungary. However, since this would only open up for Romania to join the war, we decided to send our forces to Italy instead, where we in our first battle were extremely close to split Trieste from mainland Italy. But sadly, we probably won't be this close ever again, since they've massively reinforced the front. So, to have something to do, we returned to Hungary nonetheless, where the Germans had advanced a little. We helped them out by encircling some forces in Zalaegerszeg, and after they were defeated, we encircled the even bigger city of Győr, defeating its defenses as well. But after this, with Hungary stabilized and the Germans continuing to successfully defend the French onslaught in the west, to the point of Entente casualties reaching 4 million men, we decided to call our forces back home. Because now we felt ready to demand all our Ukrainian lands. And since it is so much, there is no way they accept it, so we have entrenched our units along the border and prepared an assault on Berestia. But for some unknown reason, the Ukrainians complied with our demands, giving away more than half of their country. And this could be what grants us our first major victories, because we now have a border with Romania, something they never could have predicted, because even we didn't. So let the victories arrive. After our huge victory of almost taking over all of Romania, hope of victory has returned. During this campaign a lot had also happened at home. We'd been forced to further increase conscription to fill our garrisons in Ukraine, and due to our massive stockpile of equipment, our high command had decided to start a tank program, because it seems no other nation except our German allies is doing one. Since this will take a lot of time and with no other front to assist in, we returned home with our army. But after about half a year we were needed once again, because the Germans had to our surprise broken through the Rhine, so with the West partially relieved they declared war on Poland. As soon as our armies were assembled and ready, we joined the war and rapidly utilized gaps in the Polish front line to capture Lwów and encircle 3 Polish divisions in the area. From this position we then saw a perfect opportunity to encircle Stanislavov and a record number of divisions, which we immediately pursued. However, as we arrived closer to success, we failed to cut off the last of the supply lines, but instead of just giving up we turned to the north, and surprisingly this shift in strategy caught the Polish so off guard that we were able to break through their lines rather quickly and soon arrived to a completely empty Warsaw. So with their capital now having fallen, we were extremely close to capitulating them, which we later achieved, first by trying and failing to capture Krakow, then by entering the city of Lodz. And thus, with the Polish government having capitulated, we split up the nation in 4 parts. The west going to Germany, the east to us, the south to Slovakia, and in the center we established a small Valkist puppet regime. After this we went back to waiting on our tank program, while also looking at the small but still important German advances in the west. They had for example captured most of the Rhineland and Wallonia. After developing the final component for our tanks, a modern radio, we could design the rest. Due to our limited industry we kept it as cheap as possible, but due to cuts in another area we were still able to make it quite powerful. And the area with cutbacks was that of speed, because with no way to import rubber to produce trucks, our tanks would be slowed down nonetheless by their accompanied infantry. Once it was developed, we switched our whole war industry for its production and our whole civilian sector towards importing resources for it. But even before our first tank divisions were deployed, our army saw action once again, because Germany had for the first time in the war entered French core territory, and our infantry could help them keep this offensive going to Paris. Unfortunately, however, once we arrived, Entente reinforcements also did, so we failed to make any gains at all. Instead, it was the Germans that once we left restarted their offensive and arrived all the way to the capital of France. And once our first 4 tank divisions arrived to the front, they had reached even further into the country without our help, but at least we will be able to help them in the end of this battle. We started by, with the support of German forces, encircling and capturing the port town of Cherbourg, where we also got it confirmed that our tanks were quite effective. We would then continue to Brittany, where we first failed to advance due to no German backing, but once they got the memo we were able to split Brittany from the rest of the French front and then destroy the 8 garrisons in Brest, making our casualties on the French reach over 100,000. Which might sound like a lot, but compared to the 14.5 million Entente losses it isn't that much. We continued our advances along the Bay of Biscay, where with the help of the Germans we broke through the Entente defenses and could arrive to the biggest city along this bay, Bordeaux. After it was captured, we turned to the east, where we drove and marched along the Garonne River, mostly uncontested, until we reached Toulouse, as well as encircled 5 divisions in the western Pyrenees. With additional German advances elsewhere, the French government retreated to Africa, which basically acts as a capitulation, and leaving only Italy left in the Entente to fight. They were quite surprised by the French retreat, so the Western Alps weren't that protected, allowing us to start our offensive into Italy from this region. Together with our allies and another newly developed 4 tank divisions, we fought our way into Torino and Genova. And with still no Italian reinforcements arriving, Milano was soon captured as well, and our tanks had managed to destroy most Italian units defending the road to Rome. Together with splitting the north from the south, we further hindered Italian attempts to salvage the situation, as we now stood outside the doors of Rome. We somewhat struggled to enter the city, but by outflanking it and therefore encircling it, we were able to secure the Italian capital. Only a few days later, the Italian government also announced their retreat to Libya, officially ending the war. How Germany organizes their newly gained territories in the west doesn't really bother us, because we now have to manage 3 new puppet regimes. One in Romania, where the legionary movement was put in power, and then one in Sweden and Finland, where equally Valkist governments were established. And so, with the war and its aftermath dealt with, we can turn to our last objective, gaining our last claimed states under the control of the Soviets. Now you might think that while Lithuania and Ukraine both gave away their lands, there is no world where the Soviets will give away theirs, because their goal is indeed to annex us. However, as we sent our demands, they actually submitted, transferring lands up to Moscow to us. And the reason is simple: if war were to break out, they would collapse almost immediately. Because after the death of Lenin and Molotov becoming new chairmen, the country has turned into a failing state, as they haven't succeeded with industrialization nor collectivization. In addition, with an unpopular conscription and 0% war support, the Red Army stands on weak legs. So, with all our lands now under our control, we can revive the long-dead Grand Duchy of Lithuania, now under the new name of the Grand Duchy of Belarus-Lithuania. But we can't be a duchy without a monarch, so for the second time our constitution was changed and Vytautas II was crowned as the monarch of Belarus-Lithuania. This also initiated the coring process of all our lands, starting in Lithuania, where compliance was already high, especially after we crowned a Lithuanian king. And with that, the new and Valkist Belarus we have been striving to create has become a reality. And this leaves only one thing: destroying the socialists in our east, even though they gave away their lands. But despite them being so weak, we must still prepare for this conflict extensively. With almost all our states cored, the amount of people we were able to recruit reached over 1 million, so we were able to train several infantry divisions and 12 tank divisions, which will fill a whole tank army. With this amount of manpower, we could also go from wartime to total mobilization, sending some of our potential conscripts to the factories instead. Together with new resources from our new lands, our civilian and military industries saw a huge boom. With the help of the German Abwehr, we also set up our own intelligence service, which will be tasked with setting up a collaboration government in Russia, and that way increase their surrender progress artificially. After more than a year of preparations, our army has reached over 1 million deployed manpower, and it has over 8,000 medium tanks deployed. So, together with the Germans, who are more than eager to help us out, we justified and declared war on the failing state that is the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union has been defeated after less than 2 years, and we have redrawn the borders of the largest country on earth. Personally, we annexed Belgorods and lands up to Leningrad, while our Finnish puppet was granted the city and Karelia. In the rest of Russia, a Valkist puppet regime was established with the help of the Germans. Well, except in southern Russia and Central Asia, where 2 additional countries were formed. Now, while I did say the war against the Soviets would be the last thing, I was kinda lying, because now that we have fully encircled Latvia and Estonia, it feels strange to let them live on. So, once our troops returned from Russia, we declared war on them and quickly gobbled them up, because compared to the Soviets, they are of course no match. And so our Duchy of Belarus-Lithuania has reached the territorial grandness that we have pursued. With our industry and army one of the strongest in Europe, we can definitely be counted as one of the great powers in the world. So, thanks so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video and see you in the next one.